Chapter 8 Dragging the Dead. They all turned and looked at the pile of soggy corpses. Sebastian stood with his mouth open, his eyebrows frowning. Jonathan had already thought that through. The freezer, he said. Otherwise, they'll. He stopped and grimaced, then shrugged. We'll have to put them in the freezer. Sebastian nodded at him. That makes sense, he said. The freezer is a long ways away, Tony said. Sebastian raised his eyebrows at him. Then we'd better get started. Sebastian did the math of 8 bodies and 16 boys and assigned each body to 2 boys. None of the pairs could get their body more than a few feet before dropping it with a stomach-twisting, meaty splash in a puddle, though. Dead bodies are heavy, it turns out. When they're wearing rain-drenched coats and wool trousers, they're really heavy. And when they're rain-soaked bodies of men being carried by a bunch of kids who don't even really want to touch them, they're almost impossibly heavy. Okay, Sebastian barked, gasping for breath and still holding Mr. Warwick's feet in his hands. 2 trips, 4 people per body. Someone take one of these legs. The bodies were still heavy, but in teams of 4, they at least managed to drag them towards the door. It was tough going, though. Curses and accusations echoed through the courtyard. Come on, you're only pretending to hold that arm. Lift higher. It's hard to pull when his head's dragging like that. I am trying, Jason. His ankle is just too slippery. No, not by the elbow, dummy. Grab under the armpits, like this. Gross, his tongue touched me. But step by step, they got the bodies out of the courtyard and through the door and down the dark alley into the room where they'd eaten breakfast. The groups were spread out by then, depending on how big a body they'd gotten stuck with. Jonathan was with Colin, Miguel, and the kid named David. They unfortunately had ended up with the Admiral, and they were at the very end of the morbid, sweating, swearing parade. Dang, man, Miguel panted, wrestling a leg that was slippery with rain. Why'd I get stuck with 3 of the littlest guys? David, who was trying to get a good grip on the Admiral's right arm, shot him a look. I ain't no weakling. Nah, you know what I mean, Miguel said quickly. We all know you tough. That's why you're here, right? For being tough and stuff like that, like almost killing some guy or something. Jonathan glanced nervously at David, but David just rolled his eyes. No, just for fighting. Yeah, Miguel said, but like for a lot of fighting, right? David shrugged. They struggled for a few more steps in silence. But then he spoke again, his quiet voice a rush of frustration. I'm the only Japanese kid at my school, right? And every day they make fun of me. They push, they throw things, whisper things. And so, yeah, I fight back. So I get lots of patience, right? I get lots of practice, right? So after a while, I start to win. And what's wrong with that? So some moron starts up again and ends up with a broken jaw and a concussion, and I'm supposed to be sorry? The judge says, David bitterly slipped into a deep adult voice. All these terrible fights, all these stitches and broken noses, and you are the common denominator. Me, I laughed at the judge, because from where I'm sitting, the common denominator is all those stupid white boys. Miguel dropped the Admiral's leg and straightened up to catch his breath. Sure, man, he said. Whatever you say, you're on top. You're the numerator, man. Just remember, I ain't white next time you start swinging, okay, champ? David scowled. What about you, he said. What are you in for? Miguel shrugged. Truancy. I'm not, like, super great at showing up to school, you know? My folks choose to send me there to fix my attitude. Can you believe that? A grin spread across his face. But look at me now, choosing to stay here. When we could go home. I'm reformed. He looked around at them, waiting for a laugh, but they were all too tired and out of breath. Jonathan gave him a little smile and swiped the sweat from his forehead. What about you, newbie? Miguel asked. What'd you do to get yourself sent in here? Jonathan's smile flickered away. His eyes dropped from Miguel's. The Admiral was looking at him, his foul mouth open and his dead eyes gaping. Come on, Jonathan said. Let's get this over with. The guy ain't getting any lighter. The boys stooped and regained their holds and hoisted the Admiral up with a chorus of grunts and curses. This is absolutely insane, Colin complained under his breath, changing his grip around the Admiral's left arm. We should have told right away. You keep that to yourself, Jonathan murmured, looking up at the hallway. I think Sebastian will actually kick your butt if you keep talking like that. Jonathan was holding the Admiral's other limp arm and dragging it backward, with Walter and David each had a leg. The bathroom? This was your idea, Jonathan. Jonathan frowned and cleared his throat. The Admiral's head rocked from side to side as they walked, looking back and forth from him to Colin like he was listening to the conversation. Jonathan tried to avoid the Admiral's glassy, staring eyes. Well, yeah, I was right, but I didn't want to go home. The Admiral's head flopped over to Colin. Well, none of us do. The Admiral flopped his head to Jonathan. Jonathan didn't know what to say. He looked away from the Admiral's accusing eyes. It's just for a few days, Colin, he said through the gritted teeth. His fingers were burning from the Admiral's weight. Just relax. It'll be fun. The Admiral's corpse looked back to Colin. His tongue was starting to stick out. Fun with him in charge? He'll be worse than the Admiral. Colin looked at the Admiral's empty stare. No offense. Sebastian's not in charge, Jonathan assured him. No one is. It's just all of us. He's not taking over. Colin looked up at Jonathan's eyes and frowned his little frown. Just wait and see. He shook his head. The inmates are running the asylum. The inmates are running the asylum? What does that mean? Colin shrugged. That's a thing. Who says it? People. When do they say it? The Admiral's head rocked back over and looked at Jonathan. Colin sighed and put his shoulder against the Admiral's uncooperative arm. When everything's just going wrong. By then, some of the boys had already made it to the freezer and dropped their bodies off. They walked out of the kitchen, red-faced and sweaty. Sebastian was among them. Listen up, he called out, panting. Once you get both of your bodies put away, we're going to meet at the big table. We need to decide some stuff. And hurry up. Colin shot Jonathan a meaningful look that he pretended not to see. Finally, they got the Admiral's bloated body to the freezer. Their breath puffed in frosty clouds as they dragged and pushed him up into the pile of corpses. Jonathan was the last to leave. He slipped gratefully out of the freezer, but groaned when the door hit the Admiral's jutting boot just 6 inches shy of closing. Colin and the others were already out of the freezer door and into the kitchen, heading back for the next corpse. He kicked the Admiral's boot, but his leg was stiff and the boot wouldn't budge. He sighed and looked over his shoulder and reluctantly walked back into the freezer. He grabbed the Admiral under both armpits and heaved, trying to twist him over and higher onto the pile of bodies. As he did so, he heard a metallic clanging and looked down. The key had fallen out of the Admiral's jacket pocket. It was a big key, rusty and old-fashioned. Jonathan glanced around and shivered. He picked up the key and slipped it into his pocket. Then he gave the Admiral one last push to clear the door and walked out to rejoin the rest of the boys.